Let's talk online coding assessments. Online coding assessments are often the first step in the interview process at many companies, and they often consist of one or a few coding challenges. They help companies gauge whether a candidate is ready to be interviewed by a real person, and for those reasons, it's important that you make a really good impression on the company by performing your best at this coding challenge. The first tip I have is to allocate enough time for your coding challenge. I hear too many times people who start a coding challenge that's 90 minutes when they only have an hour to complete it. In those cases, you're putting yourself at an unnecessary disadvantage. You're introducing stress into the environment, and you're probably not going to perform at your best. So remember, allocate enough time for your coding challenge to maximize your potential. The second tip I have is to read through the coding challenge carefully. Oftentimes, problem descriptions will have a couple sentences articulating what a few edge cases might be, and they won't make it super obvious. Companies are looking out for detail-oriented candidates, and this is one way to set yourself apart. Third, I recommend that you comment your code. You might think that submitting your code and passing the test cases is sufficient, but oftentimes engineers will go through your code and sift through for style or comments and make sure that your code is generally legible. You want to make sure that later on, if you or someone else looks at your code, that it's easy to read and it's easy to understand. In this way, you'll further your chances at getting past the coding challenge and getting that first interview. Fourth, I recommend that you submit your code often. While it's okay to come up with a full-fledged solution and submit it once at the end of your coding challenge, it shows to the company that you're trying different ways of testing your code or working out a problem if you submit often. Companies, interviewers, recruiters, and engineers can see the number of attempts you've made on a solution, and they can see the progress of the test cases you've solved over the course of your solution. It's far more interesting to see a candidate who fails 20 times before finding a successful solution rather than one candidate who magically comes up with a solution at the end of their coding challenge. Also, it helps to save your code often. You don't want to finish up a coding challenge and have 10 minutes left only to notice that your internet connection is out and you've lost all the progress that you've made. The final tip I have is to stay relaxed during your coding challenge. Because it's online, you can control your environment, whether that be at school, in the library, or at home in your living room. Be somewhere that's comfortable. Make sure to get a glass of water if you need to, take a walk every so often, and ensure that you're not stressing yourself out or getting flustered over a coding challenge that seems daunting. At the end of the day, you have an hour and a half or so to prove yourself, and if it's a really challenging problem, odds are that other candidates also struggled, so still give it your best and don't give up easily. Let's go over one of HackerRank's easy sample problems to make sure that we're looking at all the important information. Given an unsorted array of n elements, so I'll highlight that, find if the element k is present in the array or not. That's telling us that we're looking for k and we're going to have some sort of Boolean checking for it. Now, it gives us the parameters that we won't go over, but importantly, we do want to return a string, yes or no, which is the way our Boolean is going to be represented, denoting if we found the element in the array or not. Next, let's look at the input format. It's crucial to take a look at this carefully to make sure that our program can read the inputs. While sometimes your HackerRank or other coding challenge software will provide the inputs for you in a nice manner, sometimes they won't. And in those cases, it's important to look at the input format so we can parse input correctly. We see that the first line contains an integer n, denoting the number of elements in the array ARR. That's important to note just in case we have to manually parse this input. Each line I of the n subsequent lines, so just every line, contains an integer describing the array at the end of that index. Again, this is important for manually parsing. Finally, the last line contains the integer k that needs to be searched. So we need to make sure that we're noticing all of these facts, because otherwise we'll just get a jumble of numbers that we have no idea what to do with. We have some constraints for our problem. While in this case it doesn't really matter, for harder problems where time complexity becomes an issue, you do want to consider the constraints. Finally, we get the output format. So again, we'll highlight this string, yes or no, and that's our Boolean, and that'll tell us if the element is present in the array or not. And we're printing it to stdout, which just means that we're going to be printing it out on the console, like system.out.println in Java or print in Python. And there you have it. That's how you go over a simple problem. Make sure to read and reread every single line in the problem so that you have a full understanding of what's happening before you come up with a solution.